Okay, greetings everyone. This is Josh, and we have another episode tonight of Horror Hangouts. And tonight, my guest is Staci Layne Wilson. How are we doing tonight, Staci?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
And thank you for coming on. And you are a filmmaker, a podcaster, author, rock and roll historian. Staci, I don't think you have enough things to do on your plate right now.
I'm also a rat custodian, as my followers know. They always look forward to my Ratter Day pictures.
I bet. So obviously, this being a horror channel, where did your love of horror begin?
When I was a small child, I do remember watching Vincent Price movies with my dad. So I loved all those 60s and 70s horror films. And my mom also enjoyed horror movies, some of the more extreme ones like The Exorcist and The
Mm-hmm.
Shining and those. But she also read a lot of horror. So when I was a kid, I was reading Stephen King novels and scary books like that. So I've always just kind of been drawn to it. I don't really find it scary, but I
Mm-hmm.
still really enjoy all aspects of horror because there's so many different facets to it. If you're in the mood for like cozy horror, or you want something extreme, or you want supernatural, or you want serial killers, I mean, there's so many different moods that it can accommodate. So I never get tired of it.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I kind of started as a small child watching the old Universal monster movies, Dracula, Frankenstein, and kind of worked my way up. But you're right. The great thing about horror is there are so many different subgenres within it that you can find anyone can find something, that they're
That's
going
right.
to like for the most
Yeah,
part. And I know as a writer, I'm like trying to tackle every subgenre that I can as I go forward. So it's like,
oh, that's
okay,
fun.
I did, it's like I've done a horror western. I'm now working on a vampire gothic erotic story.
I
And
did
then,
see that on your website. Yeah, how
right.
fun.
And then, and then who knows what the next one will be? It might be a serial killer loose in. I've always wanted to do a period piece in ancient Rome because I think that would be a
Oh,
perfect thing for a horror. So that might be something I might do sometime in the future.
that is a fairly unexplored location and time era for horror, so that would be
Yeah,
really fun.
I'd have to brush up on my history and watch a lot of the
That's
Spartacus
right.
series. But
Yeah.
so what were some of your favorite? Did you have a particular favorite horror movie or movies that really kind of you that's like your go-to movie when you're really your favorites?
Actually, I did bring some visual aids here since we're on camera, at least for some of your podcasts. Those watching on YouTube can see. The
Mm-hmm.
Orphanage is one of my all-time favorites, really atmospheric Spanish horror movie, Spanish
Mm-hmm.
language. And Guillermo del Toro produced it. I remember doing the press junket for this actually and meeting the director, and yeah, it was just really fun. Now, I also love me some good Italian horror, so I have to
Mm-hmm.
show off two of my very favorites.
Let's see. I think
Suspiria.
Suspiria, of course.
Yes, I mean, this music is just incredible. I
Oh
love
yeah,
the music. And
Goblin.
then The Psychic by
Mm-hmm.
Fulci is another one of my favorites. And they're just so different. I don't know, there's something about the Italian horror films, that the fashion and the music and the beautiful interiors and just the
Mm-hmm.
really fun, sometimes weirdly oddly placed cameos by American actors. I can't remember the name of the movie offhand, but there's an Italian giallo that's co-starring Carl Malden of all people. It's like,
I know that's
what?
the weird,
So that's
the
always
American
fun,
Express guy,
right? But this one is actually my all-time favorite. I
The
have to
Shining.
give it up for The Shining. Yes, I love it. I know that Stephen King himself is not the biggest fan of this adaptation, but I'm a huge Kubrick fan, so I love
Mm-hmm.
just what he brought to the story. Different nuances, and it's so chilling. And it's one of
Yes.
those movies that, even though it's quite long and it can be, I guess, slow at times for, maybe people with
Mm,
ADD, but I'm always just like drawn into it and wrapped up in
mhm.
it. So I think it's great. So those are some of my favorites.
Well, I think too with movies that slow down a little bit or have a slow burn, there's a big difference between it being boring and nothing going on, or now I'll use a movie like House of the Devil as a perfect example by Ty West. It just, even though nothing really happens, it still kind of keeps you engaged in the movie itself. And
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real element of suspense and relatability
mhm.
because, like who hasn't either, gone to house sit or take care of someone's dog or someone's kid and you're there by yourself. And so you can really put yourself in the shoes of the protagonist and it's fun to try to guess like, okay, who's evil, in this because there's a few different smaller characters coming and going throughout the film to keep it spiced up. So yeah, that is a really good one.
Oh yeah. And with Italian horror, that's something I've just now, that was like my New Year's resolution. I'm going to really hit hard the Italian horror because I hadn't really watched a whole lot of it. So I've been like taking, classes 101, 102, 103 as far as Italian horror.
Well, you're so
Now,
lucky nowadays that
mhm.
it's readily available because when I was getting into it in the 90s and early 2000s, you really couldn't find it except for the more mainstream titles.
Oh yeah, for sure. What would you say? I've had some people say, tell me this, that movies like, well, for example, Suspiria, I've heard some people say that that's not considered giallo. Have you
That's
heard?
true. Yeah, I have. It's not because it doesn't have a lot of the tropes. There's not really a detective police story subplot, so that and it's supernatural. So most often giallos are not supernatural, but I just feel like because it comes from Dario Argento,
Hmm.
there's a lot of the sensibility in there with the way it's shot and the zooms and the ringing phones and just it does have a lot of the tropes. So I consider it an honorary giallo film.
Yeah, I was like wondering because to me, it's like, well, this looks like giallo to me. It feels like giallo to me, and it's like
Yeah.
it's the same type of it's beautifully grotesque in its own
Hmm.
way. I guess is a good at or yeah, a good way to describe Italian horror. So let's see here. Right. So tell us. Obviously, you're into filmmaking. So one movie that I've watched recently called Fetish Factory, or also known as Cabaret of the Dead, I think, was
Hmm.
the alternate title, and I'm not sure why that is with movies. But what going into that? What was that something you also wrote and directed?
Yes, it is. And I was a work for hire writer director for Blanc Bean Productions. So that's Michael Bean's, the actor, former
Hmm.
production company, and his wife Jennifer is in the film. And she really wanted to give first time directors and especially women directors their big breaks. And so I had done one short film prior to that called The Key to Annabelle Lee, which stars Ogre from Skinny Puppy as Edgar Allan Poe. Yeah, so she saw that and she really liked what I had done and said, "Hey, you want to make a movie in 5 days?" I'm like, "Okay, I'm game." So it was kind of the Roger Corman run and gun school of
Right.
filmmaking, but I love it. I love that fast pace,
Hmm.
and I don't mind having a little to work with. It really brings out your ingenuity. So that was a lot of fun, and I'm still very proud of that movie. That is my first feature.
Oh yeah, and I kind of enjoyed it. And obviously having a low budget, but it looked like, I mean, what impressed me the most, it was a fairly, I mean, it's a zombie, it's basically zombies that pop up in a burlesque club, more or less.
Right.
So
It's
there's
a
not a whole lot to
zom-com.
it.
You've heard of rom-coms. This is a zom-com.
Exactly. Which it kind of reminded me, I don't know if you ever saw the movie with Robert Englund, Zombie Strippers,
I
but
did.
the
I
tone,
actually did that junket and
awesome.
interviewed all the stars. And yeah, that was really fun. That is a very fun one. That one did have a bigger budget than us, though. But yeah, I loved all the intellectual asides that were fun to kind of catch those little references.
Well, I was really impressed too with the performances of the actors, and I liked how at the beginning you really didn't know who your main point of view out of all these girls. You didn't know who the main point of view character was. At first, you think it's the new girl because that's a typical trope, but it really isn't her. And by the time we find out, and then the now I'm lousy with character names, so forgive me,
Oh, I
but
am too.
the girl's brother comes up. I really like the relationship between him and who ends up being the final girl, how that developed. So I thought the actors and actresses did a terrific job in that. How much directing did you have to actually have to do with the actors, or do you just pretty much let them make
No,
their
I mean,
make it their own, I guess?
how that could be trouble
Mhm.
when an actor's like, I'm going to do it this way.
Right.
That's what the director is for. But it does help being the writer and the director because you have a more focused vision of what you're hoping to achieve. However, with such low budget films, you don't have much rehearsal time at all. I think we only had one table read beforehand. So I had to give them just some pretty short but to the point notes of who I saw these characters as being. Many of them were quite natural, like Carrie Keegan, who plays the Betty Page character. That was her
Hmm.
first starring role in a feature, and she just nailed it. I thought she just very natural, very believable. So in terms of directing, yes, you give them a few notes before the cameras roll, but with a low budget film, you have to get every single scene in only a 5-day time frame. You don't have time for take after take, so you really
Hmm.
have to nail it on 1 or 2 takes, or you're missing a huge part of your film, which you don't want.
And I think you just kind of answered my next question, which would have been the kind of like the challenges of doing a movie like this. And I think you kind of listed those mainly, basically time. It seems like is the biggest challenge is getting everything done in a certain
Definitely.
amount of time.
Especially
Um,
with that particular film, because we had a whole troupe of burlesque dancers, we had several zombies, we had beauty makeup, we had zombie makeup. So all that stuff takes time, hair, makeups, the practical effects. So you really have to surround yourself with a really experienced, talented crew when you're starting out because they'll really be your rocks.
exactly. So, what's the most rewarding part of making a movie for you?
It's the collaboration. Although I wouldn't say that it's my way or the highway in terms of what I want out of a performance, but I try to give a solid foundation. But it is fun to see what an actor will bring to the role.
Hmm.
And oftentimes it's something that you didn't expect, and that turns out to just be really great addition and brings dimension and nuance to the characterization. So I do love the collaboration, and it is really fun to hear your words brought to life from the page of a screenplay to
Hmm.
the screen. So yeah, it is. It's really kind of a thrill every time.
And have you done any other feature films since then?
Yes, I have. I've written quite a few. I have one right now that I co-wrote called "Don't Get in the Car," which is sweeping the film festivals right now. In fact, I'm off to an award show later tonight, so fingers crossed that we get something out of that. Yeah, it's a grindhouse kind of throwback to the gritty '70s Abel Ferrara sort of feel. And so that is directed by Clarice Paris, who is a very, very talented lady. And
Hmm.
so we co-wrote that screenplay together. My other film that I have out now, it's a feature that I co-wrote and directed called The Second Age of Aquarius, and it's about rock star from 1970 who was electrocuted on stage, and he's brought back to life in present day. So it's kind of like Weird Science meets Oliver
Trick or
Stone's
treat
Memoirs.
almost.
Yeah, exactly. So that one's a fun one, and that one's mainly a two-hander in one location. Another one that had a low budget, but
Mhm.
hopefully enough talent behind and in front of the screen to make it fun and entertaining. We really worked hard on that. And then I'm in post production on another film called Dark House of the Mannequins, which is kind of a tourist trappy kind of one location thriller.
Okay. And those
Yeah.
sometimes can be the best when you just stick to one location oftentimes.
Hmm.
Um, do you have like are there any directors in the horror genre that you kind of look up to or just your basically your favorite directors or anyone that's influenced you in any way, shape, or form?
Well, I'd say probably the person who influenced me the most is Brian De Palma, just because I love his visuals. I love the split screens and, all that kind of really visual elements that I enjoy. And that's something that you can do on a low budget. You can have some really cool visual. I do love Dario Argento, at least the classic Dario lately. His movies have not been quite up to snuff, but that's what Quentin Tarantino said. That's why he only wanted to make 10 films because he said as the director gets older and older, I guess talent gets duller and duller, just because I guess they've been around the block so many times, there's
Hmm.
really nothing new to bring. But then again, so many European directors and Italian directors, French directors, they work well into their 70s, 80s, and 90s and are still
Hmm.
just as fresh. So I don't know what kind of argument that really is, but I do enjoy, yeah, Brian De Palma. I love Dario Argento. I like Maya Deren, Meshes of the Afternoon. I love an art film, so
Hmm.
that's just really something that I enjoy. And I have made a few arty short films that I feel speaks to those sensibilities. But in terms of directors today, I mean, you mentioned Ty West. I think he's
Hmm.
fantastic. He really has a good command of the retro feel, but bringing a modern and faster paced sensibility to it. I mean,
Hmm.
not with House of the Devil, but with X. And of course, I'm really looking forward to Maxine.
Yeah, me
So
too.
it's fun to see a director who collaborates with some of the same actors or the same crew, same editor over and over again, because then it's really a well oiled machine, like with Martin Scorsese, say with
John
Leonardo
Carpenter.
DiCaprio and yeah, right, and John Carpenter. So people that really kind of have that well-oiled machine going can be quite fun to watch that progress
Hmm.
and see what the different people bring to a single project.
Oh yeah, and those are some good directors. And for the record, I think I'm the only human being alive that likes Argento's Dracula. So,
We actually saw that. I was co-hosting a talk show called
mm,
Inside Horror with Elric Kane back then, and we were based in LA. And we went to the screening at the Chinese Theater, and Dario was in attendance to
mhm.
introduce the film. And yeah, nobody liked it, and it was kind of awkward. It's like, oh my god. But maybe if I saw it again, I think if you sometimes go into a film with certain expectations, and you're like, oh, what's this? I don't like this. And then you go back and you watch it again, you're like, your expectations are lowered, and then you find more to love about it. So that could well be the case.
Yeah, that happens a lot with movies, and sometimes the reverse happens. You like a movie a lot more than you think, and when you see it the second time, you're like, guess that wasn't as
This
good as
is
I
true.
thought it was. Well, other than horror, it seems like your other passion is rock and roll music.
That is correct.
Um,
Nice
where did
shirt.
your where did Yes, I came prepared. My favorite band. Uh, where did it all start for your love for rock and roll?
Well, probably from my dad. He's the founder and rhythm guitarist of The Ventures, which is a
Wow.
guitar driven rock group, instrumental. So I actually directed a documentary about the Ventures as well. So that is a different movie that I made, a different kind. But yeah, my dad just really exposed me to a lot of different kinds of music, especially as a young kid going to watch him perform. At festivals or different multi-artist bills. So I got to see a lot of really great musicians play, but it's just always something that I've really been drawn to. And I think I grew up in the best era of music, being Gen X. We
Same
got
here.
so many fantastic bands to be able to see live, and just the excitement of waiting for an album to come out and waiting for that monthly Cream magazine or, something to read about your favorite band. So it really just got you pumped for music. So that I think that's has a lot to do with it. And I don't know if you can see my necklace here, but it's Zoso for Jimmy Page. So he's one
I
of
have a
my all-time
tattoo on my
favorites.
chest of that same
Nice.
one.
Yeah. So I love guitar-driven rock. That is my
Mhm.
favorite.
Excellent. Yeah, we really were born in just the perfect generation because we were still, even though we weren't around for to really watch the 60s and 70s,
Right.
we were still close enough to those decades to appreciate it. You know, stuff from whoever it be, the Stones, Beatles, Led Zeppelin, The
Oh
Who,
yeah.
Pink Floyd. And
Yeah.
then we came up through the 80s. We saw all types of metal, hair metal, thrash metal,
Yes.
speed metal, and then the 90s, the grunge and alternative scene kicked
I
in. So
love
we
grunge. Yeah, and
mm,
the White Stripes. I don't know if you can see my guitar there, but it's a little nod to Jack White's red and
mm,
white airliner guitar. So yeah, I just love it. And I really immerse myself. This is my office, by the way. So I
mm,
immerse myself in the things that I love visually. And it really
mm.
helps inspire me.
Oh yeah, and so do you have any particular favorite bands or singers that you said guitar driven? So who are some of your favorite guitarists?
Well, I have to pick Jimmy Page and Jack White, but I also love Keith Richards. I think Neil Young is an underrated guitarist. Maybe not anymore, but back in the day he was. Let's see. I love Jeff Baxter. He's actually a friend of my dad's, so I grew up knowing him, but not really realizing until seeing him play. Just he'll blow you away live. He's amazing. So he was with Steely Dan and the Doobie Brothers, and just super, super talented. um, Dwayne Allman. I love like really, like I said, guitar driven. So I love
Hmm.
the solo and where the guitar is the star of the song. So I do enjoy that. As far as singers go, Robert Plant, Jim Morrison. I love Bob Dylan. He's one of my all-time favorite singer-songwriters. I like everything from Joni Mitchell to Judas Priest, so I have a wide range of taste.
Yeah, I like Judas Priest because I've always kept my hair short. So whenever I see Rob Halford with short hair, goes, all right, that's my guy. I can relate to him. Yeah,
Exactly.
I don't have to wear long hair to be a headbanger after all.
Mhm.
So, oh yeah, yeah. And the great thing about rock and roll, there are like horror, have so many different subgenres to it. You have
Mhm.
whatever it is, southern rock, hard rock, heavy metal, blues rock,
Yeah, so
folk
much.
rock, I guess you could say, progressive rock, which is kind of like my favorite genre
Yeah,
of it. So,
Rush, yes. Yeah, I don't know if you read Geddy Lee's memoir, or I listened to it actually
not
on
yet.
audio. Oh man,
Mm,
well, if you haven't caught it yet, you have to at least get a trial
mm.
membership to audible.com and listen to it. It is so fascinating and just so witty, and it's got some heavy moments, but it's also light. His sense of humor is just really delightful. And so I highly recommend the audiobook. It's called My Effin' Life.
Yeah, I've heard about it, and it's something that it's on my list of things to do. But yeah,
Right, I know it's never ending.
yeah, I saw them like 7 times in concert. The last time being their last tour. Um, and they do have a certain quirky sense of humor about themselves when they're on. They don't take themselves too seriously, in other words. So, and that kind of shows up on their performance a little bit. But yeah, they were.
Yeah, and prog rockers are not known for their sense of humor, so it's kind of a nice, refreshing twist.
Yeah, the best way to describe them is they have like the humor and goofiness of Primus mixed in with the musicianship of like early Genesis, I guess, mixed in with Zeppelin, kind of is the best way to describe them
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
So you've listed yourself as a rock and roll historian. So I kind of know a little bit what that might be, but why don't you let the audience what that exactly entails?
Well, I have my Rock and Roll Nightmares book series, and that covers some fiction stories, but even the fiction ones are steeped in history. For instance, one of the most recent ones is an anthology featuring myself and some of my favorite authors, and it's called Parallel Lines. So it's
Hmm.
alternate history about certain rock bands. So one of the stories is, what if the Manson family had not been Beatles fans? Or what if um, Lindsey Buckingham had not insisted that Stevie Nicks join Fleetwood Mac? Or what if Rob Halford had come out 10 years before he did? So there's like, it's
Hmm.
just, so you have to know your history and be
Hmm.
accurate and then to know how to veer off from it. But I also have several nonfiction books in the
Hmm.
series. So those are more true crime related and
Hmm.
rock and roll history. Plus, I've interviewed so many rock stars over the years that I think I'm qualified to be a rock and roll historian. And I'm old. You can't be a historian when you're too young.
I'm with you there. I just turned 50 a few weeks ago, so yeah, when I was in high school, that's what I mostly read. Before I started reading horror fiction, I read a lot of rock and roll biographies on the Stones, on Jim Morrison and the Doors, and Led Zeppelin. That's seemed like that for a couple years. That's all I read was from
Oh,
those
yes.
three
Everybody
bands.
read Hammer of the Gods, right?
Hmm.
And No One Here Gets Out Alive. That was a super popular book when I
Yes.
was growing up. Yeah. So those are great. And I'm kind of bringing that back with my books, but, updated a bit. But of course, I do kind of focus on my sweet spot of the 70s and 80s.
So, doing all this research, is there anything like unusual or surprising that you would find out about a particular band or singer or whoever, any type of musician that you didn't expect to find out but did?
Yeah, well, I mean, sure, there's a few different examples of that, but it does definitely make you yearn for the days of the mystique when you didn't know much
Mhm.
about your favorite rock stars, because sometimes you find that they may have different ideas about, uh, politics
Mhm.
or social, what do you call, like socio-political
Right.
agendas and things like
Mm.
that, and you find out some of them just have totally different opinions than you might have, but I'm really have always been good about, but especially now with
Mhm.
so presentism is such a problem now that I feel like you have to separate the art from the artist. And so
Mhm.
I'm able to do that. I can still enjoy most music that,
Right.
even if I don't like the person who's putting it out, depending on what it is and how strongly I feel about the music. But I have always felt that whenever an artist puts something out in the world, whether it's a
Mm.
song, a painting, or a book, that once you've created that and put it out in the world, it's almost like having a child. It belongs to the world now, and it's really not connected to you.
Yeah. And I've always tried to do the same thing, separate the art unless they did something so egregious that I
Right.
just can't. I won't mention the singer, but as a father, I can't abide child molestation, let's put it that way. So
Hmm.
there's certain singers no longer with us that I just cannot listen to for that reason.
Yeah, I hear you.
That, as far as like, okay, yeah, this person did a lot of drugs and had sex with a lot of groupies. So did practically everyone in in a particular era,
Right.
I
Yeah,
suppose.
there is a chapter in Rock and Roll Nightmares True Stories Volume 2 about the baby groupie era. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, so my books mainly do present the facts, but I also try to explain to maybe younger people how
Hmm.
the world has changed and become more progressive and why people did certain things that they did back then. And just to add a little context.
Exactly. And sometimes people, when looking back in history, kind of forget the context of the history of what was going on and
That's
what the
true. I'm sure that,
attitudes were.
yeah, I mean, things that we're saying and doing now may be really frowned upon 10, 20 years from now. You never know.
Yeah, I kind of see us, the only thing I worry about with certain things saying, well, you can't act like that like you did back then, is I worry about it putting I feel like it putting limits on creativity when it comes to whatever type of art it happens to be, whether it's writing or making a movie or writing a song. I worry about self censorship, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we've certainly seen that with Steven Spielberg changing the guns in E.T. to walkie-talkies, and we've seen
Mm,
Stephen King pull back on his book. I believe it was Rage that he discontinued. So yeah, I mean, but then again, it's their art, so they can do whatever they want with it.
right.
But I do like just letting people choose whether they want to see it or not. If it's something that is not politically correct or that the world is no longer interested in,
Hmm.
you should at least put it out. And then if nobody buys it, then you know that
You
it's
know,
hey, that's how people vote with their dollars.
yeah, exactly. So, and I even find myself doing a similar thing in writing the book I'm on now. I'm like, God, am I going too far with this? Do I need to pull this back? I'm like, why am I doing that? Just write it the way you think it should be and let people decide for themselves whether or not they're offended by it or not. But
Yeah, I do
yeah.
find that some people have trouble separating fictional characters from the person that created that fictional character. So if you have a bigoted fictional character,
Hmm.
sometimes the author or the screenwriter or the singer or whomever will be taken to task for that. So people have always had a hard time separating that. I mean, I'm just saying the general
Oh,
population.
yeah.
I do recall reading interviews with soap opera stars back in the 80s, who fans would come up and say, "Oh, I hate you. How could you do that?" And they'd be dead serious. It's like, I'm an actor. I'm reading a script and I'm acting. So yeah, it's just going to be it's going to be something that's perennial.
Yeah, I guess I mean, I have to think back to like when All in the Family came out. I wonder how many people thought that Carol O'Connor played Archie Bunker really believed the stuff that his character was
Right.
coming out of his mouth, and some people probably didn't even understand that this was satire, and some people probably actually took it seriously. But
I know. Yeah.
so,
Is
all
that a
right, so
goblet?
that
Josh,
is
is that a
my
goblet that you're drinking out of?
that is a Las Vegas wine glass that I bought a
I love
few
it.
years. I have a mix and match. There's a white one with the same lettering that my wife has, and I have this one. So
Nice.
yeah, it was time for an afternoon wine. So wine tasting. So
Hmm.
we've gone through the filmmaking. Of course, you're writing historian, and now you also have a podcast. So why don't you talk about your podcast and what kind of fun things do you do on that?
Well, this is my podcast that's tied into my Rock and Roll Nightmares brand. So I have, geez, I think a dozen books out now in the Rock and Roll Nightmares banner. So the podcast is really an offshoot of that, wherein I get to talk to some really interesting authors and musicians, and some author slash musicians. Like I had Josh Mallerman on a couple weeks ago, and Ron Malfi, who's a horror author and also has a band. So it's really fun to talk to people
Mhm.
that kind of share the same sensibility as me. And I don't do anything to monetize it. It's really just for fun and to help other people discover some of the cool things that I love. So I had Peter Ross on, the vocalist of one of my favorite bands called Crashing Wayward. They're new and they play here in Las Vegas a lot. So um, that's really what I'm in for it. Just to give people a forum to introduce them to my listeners.
Yeah, that's why I kind of got into this. I mean, I have no delusions I'm going to make 1 red cent off of this, or
Yeah,
when
we're
it's
not
on.
making Joe Rogan money, right?
No, and I don't suspect I ever will. Be nice, and I could just retire and just all I would look all would have to do is just doing podcasts and writing. I'd be set. But it just came down to, you know what? I watch a lot of other YouTube channels of people basically doing the same thing, talking about horror, and I thought, well, I know other authors. Why don't we do a show together or record it and see what happens? And I of course have other things on my YouTube channel besides doing horror. So just throw it all in one big tent. And you're like the second independent filmmaker now that I've had on this week, and I plan on having a couple more hopefully
Oh,
later on.
fantastic.
Yeah, so and I think anything I can do to, I guess, contribute to the horror community and let people know that, hey, there's these people out there. Not every movie is Halloween 23 or
Exactly. Yeah.
the next Exorcist movie that I don't think anyone even wanted. Um, there's my
Oh, yeah.
there's my shot at Blumhouse. I'm sorry, but anyhow, there are, in other words, there is other movies out there. You just have to search for them, and there's a lot of great ideas and very unique ideas at that. So you're certainly been a part of that, and for that, I and the rest of the community thank you for, and keep doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I've made some wonderful friends through my podcast too. So it's
Mm.
just really been a very enriching experience, and it's positive despite the name Nightmares. It's we're just exploring the dark side of literature and music on the podcast with a healthy dose of humor.
Well, it's much like anything. It's just like going on a roller coaster. For some reason, we like being, even though I don't find horror movies scary either, we do like that dark thrill, I guess, and maybe it helps
Hmm.
us deal with the real horrors of life better.
Yeah,
Who knows? But
exactly.
if anything, it probably teaches us empathy. So at least I hope it does for most people. But
Hmm.
one last thing,
Hmm.
rock and roll and horror often overlap a lot. Obviously we see that with Rob Zombie, but
Yeah.
I I knew a lot of people in the 80s. If you were a metalhead, chances are you liked horror and vice versa. Why do you think there is that overlap between rock music and horror?
I think because it's such a kind of it's not underground anymore, but back in the day, you
Hmm.
were looked down upon if you listened to heavy metal or you liked horror movies or you read horror books. Your parents would say, "What's wrong with you?" you know.
Hmm.
So it was kind of a you were a misfit, I guess. And so I'm not sure now because it is so mainstream. I don't really think that there's that element to it anymore, but I do believe that it is just basically loving the dark side of those two genres and
Hmm.
putting them together is natural. My latest book that I have out now, it actually just came out, so I'm going to show it to you. It's called Farewell Tour. Let's see, there we go. So it's a little pocket-sized horror comedy book about a heavy metal bassist who runs afoul of his overzealous fans. And so just looking at this visual of this
Hmm.
rock star with the creepy clown and the blood spatter, I mean, it's just a natural. So, and it's so much fun to dive into as someone who's a creative person because it gives you such a large, I guess, paint box or palette to play with. So many different colors that you can add to it, and there really are no rules. And I think that's another thing. There's horror and hard rock music. There's sort of a rule breaking or renegade element to it.
Hmm. Yeah, especially back in the, I think even more mostly in the 80s, but you're right. Nowadays, it probably doesn't seem to be as much, but
Mm-mm.
definitely in the 70s and 80s, and even well into the 90s, we saw a lot of that.
Oh,
Um,
definitely. I mean, that's where the Satanic Panic came from.
hmm. Yeah, I remember. Ozzy Osbourne's a devil worshiper, or whomever. Judas Priest is making kids, you know. I mean, it's sad, of course, those things happen, but those people were obviously disturbed anyway.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, okay, well, thank you for coming on the show tonight. And you said that book is Farewell Tour. Is that available
Yes.
on Amazon?
It is. It just came out. So it's brand new, and I'm excited for people to discover it and read it. And if you like it, let me know. I'd love to hear from you.
Excellent. I'll make sure to put a link to that along with the link to your podcast down below in the video description and in the comment section. So
Okay.
get that out there. So everyone watching, go ahead and get her book and watch her, listen to her podcast. So once again, Staci, thanks for coming on. Hope you good luck on at your awards ceremony. Hope that
Yeah,
goes well for you.
thanks. I really appreciate you, Josh.
Hey,
All right,
not a problem. I appreciate you coming on.
cool.
So,
Yeah,
till
and
next time, everyone. We'll see you next episode.
bye.